Professor Dongyuk decided to treat his disgusting students to drinks at a bar after the successful completion of their project. He praised them for their hard work, telling them that they had all done an excellent job. His students looked genuinely delighted to receive his appreciation and thanked him enthusiastically for the celebration. After spending some time with them, Professor Dongyuk glanced toward the teaching assistant, who was standing nearby, and informed her that he would be leaving. He explained that he did not want to get in the way while the younger students continued enjoying themselves, and admitted that he was already feeling tired. She understood and agreed without any objection. Before leaving, he handed his bank card to her, asking her to settle the bill on his behalf later. He also reminded the students not to drink too much before quietly making his way out of the bar. Once outside, he got into his car and started driving home. While driving, he began speaking softly to the woman sitting silently in the passenger seat beside him. He apologized for returning home so late, explaining that his students had refused to let him leave because they had been overly excited about successfully completing their first major project. He gently asked whether she had become hungry while waiting for him, and suggested that they should have a drink together once they arrived home. Since she remained completely silent, he wondered whether she was upset with him. However, the woman sitting beside him was not real. She was merely an illusion that appeared only on his birthday every year. She never spoke a single word and simply stared ahead with an emotionless expression. Deep down, he knew that she was nothing more than a creation of his own imagination, yet her presence felt painfully real to him. As he continued driving, his thoughts drifted back to the past. He reflected that the woman beside him was his beloved wife, Soyoung, the person he had loved more than anyone else in the world. During his graduate school years, he had met her on campus at the beginning of spring, after an unexpected incident had brought them together. She had entered his life like the warmth of the spring season itself, and he had fallen in love with her at first sight. Soyoung had already been a single mother when they first met, but that fact had never mattered to him. He had pursued her with unwavering determination, never giving up despite the difficulties. As time passed, she eventually accepted his sincere feelings, and the two of them fell deeply in love. They shared many happy years together before fate cruelly separated them when she passed away 7 years earlier. His thoughts returned to the present as he continued looking at the silent illusion beside him. He quietly begged her to say something, anything at all. Lately, he had felt as though he had been living alongside a lifeless version of his wife. At first, he had simply been grateful that he could still see her, even if only as an illusion. However, the inability to touch her, hear her voice, or have a conversation with her had gradually driven him closer to despair. He wished that she would smile at him just once, or speak a single sentence. In that moment, he felt that he would have willingly sacrificed almost anything just to hear her voice again. Eventually, he arrived home and stepped inside the house. His eyes immediately fell upon a family photograph displaying himself, Soyoung, and Jisoo together. Looking at the picture, he remembered how easily Soyoung had smiled during those happier days. He could not understand why the version of her that appeared before him now always wore such an expressionless face. He even wondered whether she was somehow angry with him. Later that night, he lay down on his bed, and once again the imaginary figure of Soyoung appeared beside him. Looking at her with deep longing, he confessed that he had never once looked at another woman since the day she had passed away. All he had ever wanted was to remain by her side forever. Before he could say anything else, the illusion suddenly vanished without warning. Her disappearance filled him with frustration and sadness, leaving him unable to understand why she always appeared only to disappear moments later. Unable to calm his emotions, he admitted to himself that he would never be able to fall asleep in such a state. He concluded that drinking some alcohol was probably the only way he could settle his restless mind. He walked out of his bedroom and opened the refrigerator, hoping that there might still be some leftover alcohol inside. At that moment, he suddenly realized why thoughts of Soyoung had become so overwhelming that day. It was his birthday, the only day each year when her silent image always appeared before him. Just then, another voice interrupted his thoughts as Jisoo appeared and greeted him, asking whether he had just returned home. Professor Dongyuk immediately wondered whether he had accidentally woken her. She assured him that he had not. He explained that he had been unable to fall asleep and had come looking for something to drink. Noticing the birthday cake she had prepared for him, he thanked her. Jisoo smiled warmly and mentioned that there was not much else to eat besides the cake, but she would prepare some snacks for him. She asked him to sit down while she headed into the kitchen and began making food. Watching her from a distance caused another wave of memories to surface. He reflected that ever since Soyoung's passing, he had been raising Jisoo by himself. Every year on his birthday, thoughts of Soyoung inevitably returned. Although he had always tried his best to care for Jisoo, he knew that she had probably needed her mother's love much more than anything he could provide. Even so, she had grown into a kind and thoughtful young woman despite his imperfect parenting. Realizing that his efforts had not been wasted filled him with quiet relief because she had become someone incredibly precious to him. As he looked at her, he could not help noticing just how much she resembled Soyoung. Her face, her height, and even the way she looked from behind reminded him almost perfectly of his late wife when she had been younger. She had grown into a beautiful woman, just like her mother. He quietly wondered whether that remarkable resemblance was the reason he found himself thinking about So-young more and more often. A short while later, Jisoo returned with the snacks and placed them in front of him. He asked whether she would like to have a drink with him. She politely declined at first, explaining that she was not very good at drinking alcohol. Professor Dong-yuk smiled faintly and admitted that he and So-young had always shared drinks together, which naturally made him think of her again. Hearing that, Jisoo agreed to drink just a little with him. The two of them sat together, sharing drinks as they celebrated his birthday. After seeing how little alcohol Jisoo could handle, Professor Dong-yuk playfully teased her, remarking that she was already a college student, yet still had such a low tolerance for alcohol. Jisoo laughed and replied that students nowadays did not drink nearly as heavily as people of his generation had done at the same age. Looking at her proudly, he commented that someone with her appearance was probably very popular at college. He wondered aloud whether many boys invited her out for drinks. Instead of answering directly, Jisoo grew serious. She confessed that she had always felt guilty because of the many sacrifices he had made while raising her. She promised that one day she would repay all of his kindness. She admitted that she had never expressed these feelings before, but sincerely thanked him for taking care of her all those years. Jisoo then gently told him that she knew he had never allowed himself to develop feelings for another woman because he had been worried about her. She reassured him that he no longer needed to carry that burden because she was fully grown now. More than anything else, she wanted him to find happiness again and live for himself. Professor Dong-yuk quietly replied that there were still so many things he wanted to do for her as her parent. In response, Jisoo smiled warmly and told him that all she truly needed was him. Finally, she wished him a heartfelt happy birthday. By looking at Jisoo, Dong-yuk suddenly found himself frozen in place as a familiar feeling washed over him. The longer he stared at her, the more he became convinced that, for some reason, she looked exactly like So-young. Her face, her expression, and the way she was looking at him made him question his own senses. While he was still struggling to understand what he was seeing, Jisoo gently looked at him and reminded him that it was his birthday. She softly remarked that they had already spent enough time drinking and suggested that they should stop and head to the bedroom instead. Without saying much else, the two of them eventually made their way into the room together. As Dong-yuk looked at the person standing before him, he could hardly believe his own eyes. For a brief moment, it no longer seemed as though Jisoo was standing there. Instead, it felt as if So-young herself had appeared right in front of him. The illusion felt so vivid that he remained completely speechless, unable to separate reality from what his mind was showing him. However, only a moment later, he finally came back to his senses and realized that the person sitting in front of him was not So-young at all. It was Jisoo. Noticing how exhausted he looked, Jisoo quietly observed that he seemed extremely tired and gently suggested that they should call it a night instead of staying awake any longer. Hearing her words brought him back to reality even more. Deep inside, he reflected that, for just a single moment, Jisoo had looked exactly like his wife. The thought unsettled him so much that he began wondering whether he was slowly losing his mind. Trying to brush those thoughts aside, he simply agreed that ending the night would probably be the best idea. Even after agreeing, however, he found himself unable to stop looking at her. He repeatedly told himself that he should not be staring at Jisoo like that. Yet no matter how hard he tried, the image of So-young refused to leave his mind. His thoughts remained completely occupied by her, making it impossible for him to think clearly. Without even realizing what he was saying, he suddenly suggested that they should start a flexibility training together. The words came out almost automatically, as though he had spoken without thinking. Jisoo immediately reminded him that she was Jisoo, not the person he seemed to be imagining. Her voice finally pulled him back to reality once again. Feeling embarrassed by his behavior, he apologized and admitted that he was not thinking straight at that moment. Rather than becoming upset, Jisoo calmly replied that everything was all right and assured him that she could handle the situation. After that brief exchange, the awkward atmosphere gradually settled, and the two of them eventually began performing a private PT session together. The following morning, Dong-yuk slowly opened his eyes after waking up. His mind remained clouded with everything that had happened the previous night, making it difficult for him to separate reality from imagination. For a brief moment, he convinced himself that everything must have been nothing more than a strange dream. He desperately wanted to believe that none of it had actually happened. However, as his thoughts became clearer, he gradually realized that it had not been a dream at all. Everything that had happened the previous night had been completely real. The realization immediately filled him with embarrassment, and he could not help thinking that he would never be able to face Jisoo properly again after everything that had happened. Before he could continue dwelling on those thoughts, Jisoo appeared in front of him as though nothing unusual had taken place. Looking at him with her usual calm expression, she reminded him that he was getting late and told him that he should hurry, eat breakfast, and get ready for work. Still completely confused, he quietly agreed, although his mind remained far from settled. Jisoo then informed him that breakfast would be ready shortly and asked him to wash up while she finished preparing everything. Before leaving for the bathroom, he hesitated for a moment before asking whether she had slept well the previous night. Without showing even the slightest sign of discomfort, Jisoo happily admitted that she had slept better than ever before. She even added that it was all thanks to him. Hearing those words surprised him even more than before. He was left completely speechless, unable to understand how she could behave so naturally after everything that had happened. Meanwhile, he quietly reflected that their mornings together had always been peaceful, just like every other day. Perhaps nothing had actually changed for her at all. Maybe he was the only one who had continued taking everything that had happened so seriously. While he remained lost in those thoughts, Jisoo calmly walked into the kitchen and continued preparing breakfast as though it were just another ordinary morning. After finishing his shower and getting himself ready, Dongyuk returned to the dining area where Jisoo had already prepared the meal. She warmly invited him to sit down and eat with her. However, he quietly declined, telling her that he was fine and that he simply did not feel like eating anything. Even as he said those words, he continued reminding himself that he should never allow such inappropriate thoughts to enter his mind ever again. Despite his refusal, Jisoo gently insisted that he should at least eat a little before leaving for work. Unable to refuse her any longer, he eventually took a seat at the table. Even then, as he stared at the food placed in front of him, his thoughts remained completely elsewhere. He could barely comprehend the meal sitting before him because his mind was far too distracted. Before he even realized it himself, all of his attention had once again drifted toward Jisoo and her appearance. He silently scolded himself over and over again, convincing himself that he should not be responding to her in such a way. He knew those thoughts were wrong, yet he found himself completely unable to stop thinking about her like that. Seeing that he was barely touching the food, Jisoo gently asked whether he liked the breakfast she had prepared. Instead of answering her question properly, Dongyuk hurriedly stood up and explained that he really needed to leave now and would not be able to finish the meal. Jisoo simply accepted his response without questioning him any further, and quietly replied that it was all right. Shortly afterward, Dongyuk finished getting ready and headed toward the door. Without saying anything else, he left the house while Jisoo remained standing there in silence, watching him leave with a blank expression that revealed nothing about what she was thinking. After that, Dongyuk made his way to the university as usual. As soon as he arrived on campus, several students greeted him respectfully while passing by, and he acknowledged each of them before continuing toward his department. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary until another professor suddenly approached him. Slightly surprised by the unexpected visit, Dongyuk asked what had brought him there and whether there was any particular reason he wanted to meet him. The professor explained that he had actually come to meet the head of Dongyuk's department, so he had decided to stop by while he was there. He also mentioned that his wife had been asking about Dongyuk and wanted to know how he had been doing lately. After a brief pause, the professor brought up another matter and explained that his company had recently taken on a major architectural project. Because of its scale, he had been wondering if Dongyuk would be willing to help them with it. He admitted that he had always wanted to try incorporating Dongyuk's style of architecture into one of their projects, but no one seemed to understand that particular approach the way Dongyuk did. Since he had several important plans for the day, he suggested that they leave the detailed discussion for another time and simply asked Dongyuk to think about the offer until then. Just as the conversation was coming to an end, the professor called out to his wife, who had been waiting inside the car. A moment later, she stepped out and warmly greeted Dongyuk. Her name was Sujeong. Smiling, her husband explained that they were actually planning to have a date night around the university campus that day, just like they used to during their younger days. Looking at Sujeong, Dongyuk jokingly wondered whether he should start addressing her as madam now. Hearing that, Sujeong immediately laughed and told him not to make her sound so old, insisting that he should simply continue calling her by her name as he always had. Dongyuk hesitated and remarked that it felt a little strange to call her so casually while standing in front of her husband, who was his senior professor. He encouraged Dongyuk to behave naturally, just as he had back when they were all still at the university together. Jokingly, he added that perhaps it was because Sujeong was living with an old man like himself that she always wanted to appear younger than she really was. Bringing the conversation to an end, he said that they should be on their way now and reminded Dongyuk to think carefully about the offer before getting back to him. Hearing that, Sujeong curiously asked what kind of offer he had made. Her husband merely smiled and teasingly replied that it was something she did not need to know. After sharing one last smile, the couple got back into the car and left together. As they drove away, the professor asked Sujeong whether she wanted to go somewhere else afterward. She quietly admitted that she was not sure where she wanted to go because it had been such a long time since they had gone out together. After thinking for a moment, she suggested that they visit the place where they had first met each other. Watching them leave, Dongyuk quietly reflected that Sujeong had once been his junior back in college and was now married to the professor he had always respected and looked up to. She had always been someone who shined as brightly as her own name suggested, carrying herself with a naturally cheerful and charming personality. Yet now, As he looked at her, he could not help feeling that there was a sadness hidden behind her smile. She no longer seemed quite like the lively person he remembered, and the difference did not escape his notice. Later that evening, Dong-yuk finally returned home after finishing his work at the university. As he walked toward the house, he quietly reflected that he had intentionally come home around the time when Jisoo usually went to bed. Ever since the previous night, it had become increasingly difficult for him to face her directly. Even though he kept telling himself that nothing had actually happened and that he was simply overthinking everything, the awkwardness still refused to disappear. Taking a deep breath, he finally stepped inside the house. The moment he entered, he found Jisoo sitting on the floor, busy cleaning the room. As soon as she noticed him, she greeted him naturally and welcomed him home. She casually explained that she was finishing the cleaning because she had not been able to complete it before leaving the house that morning. Dong-yuk simply acknowledged what she said with a quiet response. Deep inside, however, he felt a small sense of relief. Their conversation sounded much more natural than it had that morning, and the uncomfortable atmosphere between them did not feel nearly as awkward as before. Even so, he continued reminding himself that he should avoid looking at her too much. While he was trying to keep his composure, Jisoo suddenly called his name. She handed him a towel and asked him to soak it for her. Caught off guard by the request, Dong-yuk quietly accepted the towel. Feeling that he had no real reason to refuse, he eventually agreed to help her with what she had asked. Dong-yuk asked Jisoo whether she needed any more help with the cleaning. The moment those words left his mouth, he immediately felt awkward and questioned himself, wondering why even such a simple sentence sounded so unnatural to him now. Taking the towel she had handed him, he quietly walked into the bathroom to rinse it. As he stood there washing it, his thoughts once again drifted back to everything that had happened the previous night. No matter how desperately he tried to push those memories away, they continued to linger in his mind. He silently reflected that he simply could not forget what had happened between them. He even began blaming himself, thinking that his thoughts were so inappropriate that he would not be surprised if someone thought he deserved to be punished for them. He could not understand why, even now, he continued having those thoughts every time he looked at Jisoo. After finishing, he returned from the bathroom and handed the towel back to her. He quietly asked whether there was anything else she needed him to do. Jisoo calmly replied that she had already finished most of the work. She explained that she only needed him to hand over the rag he had just washed because, after scrubbing the floor, the water had become extremely dirty from all the dust, and she needed the clean rag to finish everything properly. Listening to her explanation, Dong-yuk silently handed it over, but once again he found himself unable to calm his mind. Every single time he looked at her, memories from the previous night flashed through his head without warning, making him even more uncomfortable than before. Trying to escape those thoughts, he told her that he was going to his room to change his clothes. Deep inside, he kept telling himself that he should stay as far away from her as possible. However, he quickly realized that avoiding her was almost impossible in such a small apartment where they constantly crossed paths throughout the day. As he was about to leave, he noticed Jisoo struggling to place some luggage on the upper shelf of the cupboard. Without thinking much about it, he instinctively walked over and helped her lift the luggage into place. While helping her, he quietly reflected that no matter how hard he tried to avoid getting involved with her, it never seemed to work. Ever since the previous night, Jisoo had been speaking to him much more eagerly than before, making it even harder for him to distance himself from her. Not long afterward, she asked him to bring over any laundry that was still inside his room so that she could wash everything together. Situations like that continued happening one after another, leaving him with almost no opportunity to stay away from her. As he watched everything unfold, he could not help thinking that perhaps the cleaning itself had become surprisingly dangerous for him, because every small interaction with Jisoo only caused his thoughts to become even more complicated. Once everything had finally been finished, Jisoo thanked him for helping her. Dong-yuk immediately shook his head and replied that there was no reason for her to thank him, because she had done almost all of the work herself, while he had only helped with a few small things. Jisoo smiled softly before mentioning that moving everything around had made her sweat quite a bit and that she was going to take a shower. Before heading toward the bathroom, she politely asked whether he wanted to use it first. Dong-yuk simply declined and told her that she could go ahead instead. With that, Jisoo walked into the bathroom to take her shower while Dong-yuk quietly sat down on the couch by himself. Sitting there alone, he let out a small sigh of relief. He reflected that everything had gone much better than he had expected because he had managed to control himself throughout the entire evening. Although his thoughts had wandered countless times, he had not allowed them to affect his actions. After everything had finally settled down, he made his way to his room and lay down on his bed. As exhaustion gradually overtook him, he quietly reflected that it had been an incredibly difficult day. Now that he no longer felt as tense as before, sleep was finally beginning to overtake him. He also realized that, unlike the previous day, he had not been seeing visions of Soyoung anymore. He believed that it was because his attention had been completely distracted by Jisoo instead. Even so, that realization did not bring him much comfort. Instead, He admitted to himself that he had been feeling strangely hollow and unbearably lonely lately. Just as he was about to close his eyes and fall asleep, Jisoo suddenly entered his room. Startled by her unexpected appearance, Dong-hyuk immediately asked why she had come there. Looking slightly uneasy, Jisoo quietly explained that she had been having frightening dreams every night recently and that she was afraid of sleeping alone. Before Dong-hyuk could even process what she had said, she calmly climbed onto the bed beside him and simply stated that she wanted to sleep there. Her unexpected decision left him even more surprised than before, and he could only stare at her in complete disbelief. Jisoo quietly remarked that Dong-hyuk had also been looking unusually restless these days. She gently told him that she wanted to stay with him that night because he had been working far too much lately and was barely taking proper care of himself. She pointed out that he was always busy with work and was not even eating his meals properly, making her worried about his health. Hearing her concern, Dong-hyuk responded with a faint smile, saying that he was not so old that his daughter needed to worry about his health like that. Jisoo listened to his response before softly telling him that they would always live together. Dong-hyuk simply nodded and agreed with her. After a brief moment of silence, Jisoo admitted that she did not want to be alone in her life. Her words caused Dong-hyuk to reflect quietly, believing that although she felt that way now, she would eventually find a husband in the future. He gently told her that someday she would have a partner of her own and would not have to remain alone forever. Upon hearing those words, Jisoo looked at him warmly and replied that he always made her feel so happy. Not long after saying that, she gradually drifted off to sleep. Later, in the middle of the night, Jisoo found herself unable to sleep as she quietly reflected on everything that had happened the previous night. She thought that the incident had been an incredibly shocking experience for her, one that she had never expected to go through. She still could not believe that Dong-hyuk had missed his wife so deeply that he had mistaken her for his wife. Even while thinking about it, however, she admitted to herself that it had not been an unpleasant experience. Deep inside, she realized that she had also wanted to perform the core training together with him. Although he did not agree immediately, her persistence and consistency eventually convinced him, and he finally agreed to her request. After that, the two of them decided to perform the core training together. They mutually agreed that what they were doing would remain a small secret shared only between the two of them. As they continued spending time together through those training sessions, they gradually became wonderful partners who worked well alongside each other. A few days later, Dong-hyuk was sitting alone in his university office while finishing the last of his work for the day. As he wrapped everything up, he quietly reflected on how different he had been feeling lately. His body felt much lighter than before, and even his complexion seemed noticeably healthier. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that it was all thanks to Jisoo. She handled all of the household chores without complaint, prepared meals just as her mother used to, and even helped him maintain his competitive 1v1 fight. Thinking about everything she had been doing for him, he felt deeply grateful and believed that he owed all of those positive changes to her. He wondered if the reason he felt so different was because he had finally regained the energy that he thought he had lost. Before he even realized it himself, he found that he had started craving more stretching session with her. As Dong-hyuk remained seated in his office, the door suddenly opened, and Soo-jeong walked inside before greeting him. Looking up, Dong-hyuk commented that he had been seeing her around the campus quite frequently lately. Soo-jeong casually replied that it was not as though she was someone he was forbidden from seeing. She then asked whether he had already finished all of his work for the day. Dong-hyuk answered that he had just completed everything he needed to do. After replying, he asked whether she had come there by herself before immediately asking about the professor. Hearing that, Soo-jeong pointed out that it had already been ages since he had been her professor, yet he still seemed unable to stop thinking about him. Dong-hyuk explained that it was not like that at all, and clarified that he had only been worried that something might have happened to the professor. Soo-jeong then admitted the real reason for her visit, telling him that she had actually come because she wanted to see him. After taking a seat, she reminded him that although he clearly did not remember, that day was the one they had planned to discuss their project over dinner. Dong-hyuk immediately admitted that he had completely forgotten because life had been extremely hectic for him lately, and so many things had been occupying his mind. Soo-jeong then suggested that they should leave together right away, explaining that she would take him to the restaurant so they could discuss the project over dinner as they had originally planned. After hearing her suggestion, Dong-hyuk agreed, and the two of them prepared to leave together. Dong-hyuk was sitting quietly in the car beside Soo-jeong when she casually mentioned that they were heading to her house instead of anywhere else. Her unexpected announcement immediately caught him off guard, and he turned toward her with a surprised expression. Seeing his reaction, she calmly explained that she had already told her husband that they should all meet at their home because she had wanted the chance to cook a meal for him himself after such a long time. Hearing that only made him even more surprised. After thinking about it for a moment, he remarked that, now that he thought about it, it had been a very long time since they had spent any time together after she got married. He then shifted the conversation toward her married life and commented that, from what he had always believed, the professor seemed to treat her very well. Soo-jeong smiled faintly before admitting that, Lately, she honestly did not know if he had been treating her as well as he used to. Her response lingered in Dong-yuk's mind, but before he could continue asking about it, they had already reached her house. As they stepped out of the car, the professor was already standing outside waiting to welcome them. Looking at Dong-yuk with a warm smile, he commented that it was probably the first time Dong-yuk had ever visited their home. Dong-yuk nodded in agreement and confirmed that it was indeed his first visit since they had built the house and moved into it. The moment he walked inside, his attention was immediately drawn to the architecture. Looking around carefully, he admired the high ceiling, noting how it would provide much better ventilation throughout the house. He also complimented the thoughtful placement of the windows and doors, pointing out how naturally everything had been designed. As he continued looking around, he praised one architectural detail after another, expressing genuine admiration for the overall structure and layout of the house. Sujeong smiled as she watched the two men and invited them to sit down and continue talking while she finished preparing everything. Even after taking his seat, Dong-yuk continued complimenting the architecture, mentioning how beautifully every part of the house had been planned. Hearing those compliments, the professor smiled proudly and remarked that he had known Dong-yuk would be the one person who would truly recognize the value of those architectural details, instead of simply looking at the appearance of the house. Dong-yuk responded by saying that the house was incredibly beautiful, elegant, and pleasant, adding with a smile that he was actually jealous of the lady who had the privilege of living in such a wonderful home. The professor laughed before telling him that instead of admiring the house any longer, he should come and enjoy the food that the lady of the house had prepared for them. As they approached the dining table, a large variety of dishes had already been arranged into an impressive spread. Looking at the table with satisfaction, the professor proudly commented that Sujeong had worked extremely hard to prepare such a wonderful meal for them. Sujeong immediately laughed at his words and modestly admitted that most of the food had actually been delivered, so it had not been nearly as difficult as he was making it sound. She then warmly invited both of them to sit down and begin eating, mentioning that she was going upstairs to change her clothes before joining them again. After she left the dining room, the professor began pouring drinks for Dong-yuk, and the two of them continued talking while enjoying both the meal and several glasses of wine together. As time passed and they drank more and more, the atmosphere became much more relaxed. Eventually, after having quite a lot to drink, the professor asked Dong-yuk whether he had finally decided if he was going to join their company. By then, Sujeong had returned and taken her seat at the table. Looking at her husband, she pointed out that he had practically finished all of the wine himself and lightly scolded him by saying that he should have waited until another time before bringing up such an important discussion. Dong-yuk politely responded that he would carefully think about the offer letter before making any decision. The professor immediately replied that he truly could not do it without Dong-yuk and sincerely hoped he would accept the offer. Watching her husband continue drinking, Sujeong quietly remarked that he had been drinking far too much lately. Dong-yuk looked at the professor respectfully and reassured her that everything was perfectly fine, saying that the professor was healthy enough to take care of himself without worrying too much. Sujeong simply nodded in agreement, although she still seemed slightly concerned. Before long, the professor had drunk so much that he completely passed out. Without wasting any time, Dong-yuk stood up to help him. As he supported the professor's weight, Sujeong informed him that the bedroom was located on the second floor because her husband had ended up falling asleep on the couch downstairs. Together, they made sure he was settled comfortably before returning downstairs. After everything had quieted down, Dong-yuk and Sujeong once again sat across from each other at the dining table, with the atmosphere becoming much calmer than before. Holding her drink, Sujeong softly remarked that it had been such a long time since the two of them had shared a drink together like this. Dong-yuk smiled as he agreed, reminiscing that they had often drunk together during their student days and that they had made countless enjoyable memories during that period of their lives. Listening to him, Sujeong smiled nostalgically and admitted that she had spent those days simply following him around wherever he went. She then sighed lightly and confessed that she had never imagined she would become an old married woman so quickly. Dong-yuk gently shook his head and told her that she was still very beautiful. Looking directly at him, she asked if he still thought she was charming even now. Without any hesitation, he answered that, of course he did. He explained that, although she had been a cheerful, energetic, and bubbly person during their younger days, she now carried herself with a graceful sense of maturity and femininity that suited her very well. His sincere compliment made her quietly look at him for a brief moment before she suddenly changed the topic. She told him that, if he was already comfortable enough around her, she wanted to perform a stretching session with him. Her unexpected suggestion completely caught Dong-yuk by surprise, and he looked at her with visible confusion. Calmly noticing his reaction, she explained that she honestly did not think it was such a big deal and believed there was nothing wrong with the two of them doing it together. Even though he remained hesitant because of how unexpected the request was, she continued insisting without changing her mind. After listening to her repeatedly, Dong-yuk eventually gave in and agreed to perform the stretching session with her. After completing the stretching session together, Dong-yuk and Soo-jong returned to the living room, and he quietly remarked that the professor had not woken up yet and said that it was probably time for him to leave. Soo-jong walked with him toward the entrance, and before he stepped outside, she looked at him and softly asked if they would be able to see each other again. Dong-yuk looked back at her and assured her that they would. Satisfied with his answer, she watched as he left her house and headed home. During the drive, he glanced at the time and realized that it was not as late as he had expected. He quietly wondered whether Jisoo had already gone to sleep, hoping that she had because he did not want to wake her up after returning home so late. With those thoughts lingering in his mind, he finally arrived home. However, the moment he stepped inside the house, he found Jisoo standing there waiting for him. Looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and concern, she asked if he was only just getting home. Dong-yuk admitted that he was and apologized, saying that he knew he had come back a little later than usual. Jisoo then asked whether he had already eaten dinner. He answered that he had, explaining that he had eaten while having a few drinks during a gathering. After responding to her questions, he quietly excused himself and told her that she should get some rest and sleep well before turning to head toward his room. His unusually brief response surprised Jisoo, and she remained standing there, silently watching him disappear into his room. As soon as he entered, Dong-yuk leaned against the door for a moment, feeling emotionally unsettled. He began thinking that he had been worried Jisoo might notice the lingering scent of Soo-jeong's perfume on his clothes. The thought alone filled him with guilt, making him feel increasingly uncomfortable toward her. Trying to push those feelings aside, he told himself that he was exhausted and that he should simply take a shower and go straight to bed without thinking any further. He then entered the bathroom and turned on the shower. As the water ran over him, his thoughts became even more restless. He admitted to himself that he knew he had been drunk earlier, but he still could not believe that he had ended up participating in a mobility training with Soo-jong. The fact that she was married to the professor of all people only made the entire situation feel even more unbelievable to him. He continued wondering why so many strange and unexpected things had been happening in his life lately. After thinking about it for a while, he convinced himself that it was probably because he had been overthinking everything recently and allowing his mind to wander too much. While he was still in the bathroom, Jisoo gently knocked on the door and told him that she had wanted to help him. Dong-yuk immediately refused her offer, trying to stop her from coming inside. However, she remained persistent and continued insisting despite his refusal. Unable to convince her otherwise, he eventually gave in, and Jisoo entered the bathroom. Afterward, the two of them ultimately decided to perform a strength conditioning together. The following morning, the professor slowly opened his eyes while holding his aching head and realizing that the heavy drinking from the previous night was entirely to blame. As soon as Soo-jong noticed that he was finally awake, she calmly remarked that he had slept for quite a while before reminding him that he had consumed far too much alcohol the previous night, so it was only natural for him to wake up with such a terrible headache. Still rubbing his forehead, the professor suddenly remembered Dong-yuk and asked whether he had left the previous night. Soo-jeong gently explained that not long after the professor had fallen asleep, Dong-yuk had quietly headed home. Hearing that immediately made the professor feel guilty, and he sighed before admitting that he felt bad for sending Dong-yuk home in such an awkward situation. Soo-jong quickly reassured him that there was nothing to feel guilty about because she had explained everything to Dong-yuk properly, making sure there was no misunderstanding between them. Her calm response seemed to ease the professor's worries a little. As he continued looking at her, he suddenly noticed something different about her appearance. Carefully observing her face, he commented that she seemed to be glowing that morning and curiously asked whether something special had happened. Soo-jong was slightly taken aback by the unexpected question, but she immediately denied that anything had happened and tried to maintain her usual expression as though everything was completely normal. The professor accepted her answer without pressing any further, although he continued smiling. Feeling unusually cheerful, he enthusiastically declared that he was in an excellent mood and strangely full of energy that morning. He excitedly suggested that the two of them should have a upper-lower training together and happily asked for her opinion. Rather than responding to his suggestion, Soo-jong simply told him that he should stop talking for the moment, wash up properly, and have his breakfast first. The professor agreed without any argument and cheerfully replied that if that was the case, they could simply do their training together later that night instead. After hearing his response, Soo-jong silently turned around and walked into the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Meanwhile, on the other side, Dong-yuk was preparing to leave his apartment and head out for the day. As he stepped out of the building, he noticed several movers carrying large pieces of luggage and furniture into one of the apartments. Watching them for a brief moment, he quietly assumed that someone must have recently moved into the building. Without giving it much more thought, he continued walking toward the street. However, the moment he reached outside, he heard a woman's loud voice echoing through the neighborhood. She was angrily scolding the movers while repeatedly warning them to be more careful with her luggage and belongings. Listening to her speak so loudly, Dong-yuk could not help thinking to himself that whoever had moved into the neighborhood certainly had quite a loud personality. Out of simple curiosity, he glanced in her direction for a moment. The woman immediately caught him looking and confronted him without hesitation, accusing him of staring at her. Completely caught off guard by the accusation, Dong-yuk instantly denied that he had been staring at her in any inappropriate way. However, the woman confidently insisted that men always became fascinated whenever they looked at her and acted as though such reactions were completely normal. Before Dong-yuk could even respond to her confidence, she unexpectedly called him by his name. Hearing his own name from the lips of someone he had not yet recognized left him completely stunned. Wearing a puzzled expression, he asked how she knew his name and questioned who she actually was. As he looked at her more carefully, he suddenly recognized her face. His eyes widened in complete disbelief as he finally realized that the woman standing in front of him was Soren. Shocked by the unexpected encounter, he exclaimed that she was supposed to be in the United States and immediately asked why she was suddenly there instead. Soren casually replied that she had moved there because she planned to live with her brother-in-law from now on. Without wasting another moment, she eagerly asked whether her niece, Jisoo, had been doing well all this time. Dong-yuk smiled slightly and assured her that Jisoo was doing perfectly fine. Upon hearing that, Soren's excitement became even more obvious as she happily remarked that she could not wait to see her niece again. She then wondered aloud just how much Jisoo must have grown since she is in her 20s. Soren mentioned that she wanted to say hello to her niece before asking Dong-yuk whether she was at home at the moment. Dong-yuk replied that she was usually at home around that time of the day, but she had left earlier because she already had some plans to attend to. As they continued their conversation, one of the movers approached Soren and politely informed her that they had finished moving all of the luggage and everything had been taken care of. Upon hearing that, Soren expressed her sincere gratitude for their hard work and remarked with visible relief that everything was finally done. After watching her reaction, Dong-yuk looked at her with concern and commented that she must be extremely tired after everything that had happened and all the work involved in settling back in. However, Soren simply smiled and said that despite being tired, they should still hold a party that very night to celebrate her return. She explained that their entire family had finally reunited after being apart for 10 long years, making it a very meaningful occasion. She added that she could not possibly let such a precious moment pass by without celebrating it together because opportunities like that did not come often, and she wanted everyone to enjoy the happiness of being together again. On the other side, Jisoo was sitting in the stadium with her friend Mi-soon Lee, while the two of them were watching a baseball game taking place on the field. As they focused on the match, Mi-soon pointed toward one of the players and asked Jisoo whether he was the junior she had mentioned before. Jisoo nodded and confirmed that he was indeed the same junior she had been talking about. The two of them continued watching the game attentively until it finally came to an end. Once the match was over, they cheered for him from the stands, and after he had finished greeting his teammates and wrapping up his post-match activities, he made his way over to where they were standing. As soon as he reached them, Jisoo warmly introduced the two of them to each other. The young player's name was Jong-soo, and after exchanging greetings, Mi-soon complimented him by saying that although he was only a freshman, he already had an incredibly impressive physique. She added that it was probably because he was an athlete and regularly participated in sports, which naturally helped him stay in such a great shape. Jong-soo smiled modestly before replying that since she was his senior, she did not need to speak so formally with him and could comfortably talk to him in a casual manner instead. He also mentioned that he would simply call her Mi-soon, hoping they could become more comfortable with each other. Seeing the cheerful atmosphere, Jisoo suggested that they should celebrate Jong-soo's victory together since he had played so well during the game. Both of them immediately agreed with her suggestion, thinking it would be a nice way to mark the occasion. Mi-soon then excitedly mentioned that she was especially in the mood to enjoy some drinks that day because, for some reason, alcohol always tasted better during the daytime. Later that evening, after the three of them had spent quite some time drinking together, Mi-soon encouraged Jong-soo to have one more drink with her and insisted that they continue enjoying the evening a little longer. However, Jisoo gently stopped her by reminding her that they had already drunk much more than they normally did, and that it was probably better to end the gathering there before they overdid it. Jong-soo agreed with Jisoo's opinion and politely told both of them that he would treat them the next time they met instead. With that, the three of them finally decided to head home. As they walked outside, a taxi soon arrived in front of them. Mi-soon got into the taxi first, waved goodbye to both of them, and left. After watching the taxi drive away, Jong-soo turned to Jisoo and remarked with a smile that her friend was incredibly energetic and lively. In response, Jisoo smiled back and explained that Mi-soon was not usually like that and that she normally behaved much more calmly than she had that day. Jisoo remarked that she should head home now, but Jong-soo immediately told her that he would walk her back to her place. Jisoo politely refused his offer, saying that he must already be exhausted after playing an entire baseball game and then spending the evening drinking with them. However, Jong-soo smiled confidently and assured her that he was perfectly fine, joking that he had incredible stamina and that walking her home would not tire him at all. Since he insisted, Jisoo eventually accepted his offer, and the two of them began walking together toward her apartment. As they made their way through the quiet streets, they continued chatting comfortably, enjoying each other's company after spending the evening together. Before long, they arrived outside the apartment building where Jisoo lived. She turned to Jong-soo and thanked him sincerely, telling him that she could have made it home on her own, but that she appreciated him walking her all the way there. She once again reminded him that he must be tired after the game and the drinks, and suggested that he should head home and get some proper rest. However, Jong-soo did not seem eager to leave just yet. Instead, he pointed toward the swing outside the building and suggested that they sit there and talk for a little while, since it had been quite some time since they had last spent time together. Jisoo hesitated for a moment before replying that her father would probably notice the smell of alcohol on her if she stayed outside any longer, and she was worried that he would become concerned. Even so, after seeing Jong-soo's hopeful expression, she eventually agreed and sat down beside him on the swing. As they quietly sat next to each other, Jong-soo found himself looking at her with a gentle smile. When Jisoo noticed his gaze, he admitted that he simply felt happy because it had been such a long time since the two of them had been able to spend time alone together like this. Hearing that made Jisoo smile softly before changing the subject. She mentioned that she had recently seen him on the news and had heard that he was performing so well that scouts from the United States were coming to watch his games. Jong-soo modestly brushed off the compliment, saying that it was not such a big deal and that there was still a long way for him to go. However, Jisoo sincerely insisted that it was an incredible achievement and that he should be proud of himself. After a brief pause, she curiously asked why he had chosen to attend university instead of going straight into professional baseball when he clearly had the talent to do so. Jong-soo looked at her for a moment before quietly replying that the reason was because she attended that school. His unexpected answer caught Jisoo completely off guard, leaving her visibly surprised for a brief moment as she stared at him without knowing how to respond. Meanwhile, on the other side, Dong-hyuk was walking home while carrying several bags filled with groceries. As he made his way toward the apartment building, he thought to himself that the past few days had been incredibly hectic, and that now he suddenly had to prepare for a welcome back party on top of everything else. While approaching the building, he happened to notice Jisoo sitting outside on the swing with Jong-soo. At nearly the same moment, Jisoo also noticed Dong-hyuk approaching. Curious, Dong-hyuk walked over and asked why she was sitting outside instead of being inside the apartment. Jisoo casually replied that she had simply been sitting there for a little while before unexpectedly running into him. As Dong-hyuk got closer, he immediately noticed the smell of alcohol and remarked that she had clearly been drinking since he could smell it on her. Before Jisoo could say anything else, Jeong-soo politely introduced himself by explaining that he was Jisoo's junior from high school. Dong-hyuk smiled politely and replied that he already knew who Jong-soo was, adding that everyone recognized him as one of the brightest prospects in the future of Korean baseball. Jisoo then noticed the grocery bags in Dong-hyuk's hands and asked what he had bought. Dong-hyuk responded by asking whether she remembered her aunt, Soran. Jisoo immediately replied that of course she remembered her, mentioning that Soran was an artist who had been living in the United States. Dong-hyuk then explained that Soran had finally returned home and had even moved into their apartment building. He added that she wanted to hold a welcome back party that evening and had asked him to buy drinks and other groceries for the celebration. After explaining everything, he told Jisoo to come inside as soon as she had finished talking. Hearing that, Jong-soo said that he should leave now since he did not want to keep them any longer. After politely saying goodbye, he turned around and left. Dong-hyuk then walked into the apartment building alongside Jisoo. As they headed inside together, he casually remarked that she seemed to be very close to Jong-soo. Jisoo calmly explained that Jong-soo was her junior and that the two of them had been close ever since their high school days. Shortly afterward, they entered Soran's apartment, where Soran immediately noticed Jisoo and was overjoyed to see her after such a long time. With a bright smile on her face, she warmly welcomed Jisoo and exclaimed that she had grown so much, becoming a tall and beautiful young woman. She continued praising her by saying that Jisoo had always spoken so politely and kindly, adding that with such beauty and personality, it was no surprise that boys would never leave her alone. Soran then complimented Dong-hyuk by saying that he had truly raised Jisoo well. As she continued looking at Jisoo, she suddenly became emotional and remarked that Jisoo resembled her mother so much that it was almost unbelievable. She commented that not only her face but even her figure looked remarkably similar to her mother's, adding that if Jisoo's father were not careful, he might mistake her for her mother at first glance. Hearing those words, Dong-hyuk immediately became noticeably uncomfortable and hesitated. Soran remarked with a playful smile that she had only been joking before walking over to bring out more drinks, cheerfully announcing that the party was only just getting started and that no one should even think about ending it so soon. Meanwhile, on the other side, Jong-soo continued his baseball practice with complete focus. However, despite trying to concentrate on his training, His thoughts gradually drifted back to Jisoo once again, and he found himself recalling the moments they had shared earlier that day, making it increasingly difficult for him to keep his mind entirely on baseball. As the party continued, Soren drank far more than she could handle and eventually became heavily intoxicated. Seeing that she was barely able to stand on her own, Dong-hyuk immediately stepped forward to support her, carefully wrapping one of her arms around his shoulder so that she would not lose her balance. He slowly guided her toward her room while making sure that she would not stumble along the way. Before leaving, he turned toward Jisoo and politely asked her to take care of the remaining cleanup after the party. Even in her drunken state, Soren insisted that he should stay behind and have a few more drinks with her, clearly not wanting the evening to end yet. However, Dong-hyuk gently replied that she should first focus on being able to function properly before even thinking about drinking anything else. Once everything had settled down, the two of them made their way towards Soran's home. During the walk, Soren casually mentioned that it was actually very convenient that she lived just below the apartment building, making it easy for her to return home without much trouble. After arriving at her place, Dong-hyuk carefully helped her inside before gently laying her down so that she could finally rest comfortably. Looking around the room, he quietly thought to himself that she should have unpacked all of her belongings after moving in, instead of immediately organizing a party. He believed that she must have exhausted herself by doing too much at once. Hoping that she would recover quickly, he encouraged her to get some proper rest and told her that he was about to leave. Before he could make his way toward the door, however, Soren suddenly stopped him and began asking how he had managed to take care of himself all these years. She wondered whether he had truly never entered another romantic relationship and pointed out that it had already been 10 years since her sister had passed away. She gently remarked that living alone for such a long time must have been incredibly difficult for him and that he surely deserved to have someone by his side again. She admitted that she genuinely felt sorry for him after thinking about everything he had gone through over the past decade. Before he could respond properly, she asked him to wait for a moment longer. Thinking that something might be wrong, Dong-hyuk immediately asked whether she was feeling sick or uncomfortable. She quickly shook her head and explained that she was perfectly fine. She simply felt like helping him with a relaxing stretch routine because she believed he needed to do it more and thought that physical training would do him some good. Hearing such an unexpected suggestion, Dong-hyuk paused for a moment. He hesitated because he felt somewhat awkward about it alone with a woman, and he carefully considered whether it would really be appropriate. After thinking it over for a while, he eventually agreed to her request. The two of them then began performing a relaxing stretch routine together, pushing themselves through the private one-on-one match while maintaining a steady rhythm. After completing the first round of training, Dong-hyuk looked at the time and mentioned that he truly had to leave because he had work waiting for him the following day and needed to get some rest. Soren smiled softly and assured him that she was not trying to pressure him into staying any longer than he wanted. She reminded him that he was completely free to make his own decisions and told him that he already knew the passcode to her front door. She added that whenever he felt like visiting, he could simply come over without worrying about asking for permission. Her words caught Dong-hyuk completely off guard, and he found himself unable to understand exactly what she was trying to convey or what was truly going through her mind. After returning to his own home, he tried to settle down for the night, believing that he would quickly fall asleep because he had been feeling exhausted earlier. However, the moment he lay down, he realized that sleep simply would not come. Instead of becoming sleepy, he felt more awake than ever before. His heart continued racing, and his mind refused to quiet down. He kept thinking about Soren over and over again, unable to focus on anything else. Deep inside, he admitted to himself that spending time with her had felt unexpectedly comforting. The short training session they had shared together had somehow reminded him of the warmth he used to feel whenever he had been with his late wife. Although it had only been a brief session, the time they had spent together had left him with an indescribably pleasant feeling that refused to disappear. No matter how hard he tried, he simply could not fall asleep because thoughts of Soren continued filling his mind. As he stared at the ceiling, he quietly wondered whether Soren had managed to fall asleep after everything that had happened that evening. At that very same moment, Soren was also lying awake inside her own home, completely unable to sleep. She repeatedly turned over on the couch while her thoughts remained fixed on Dong-hyuk. Eventually, she admitted to herself that even before her sister Soyoung had fallen in love with him, she herself had already liked Dong-hyuk first. She confessed inwardly that those feelings had never truly disappeared and that she still liked him even after all this time. Simply acknowledging those emotions to herself made her feel deeply embarrassed, and she could not help smiling awkwardly at her own thoughts. She quietly admitted that Dong-hyuk was still just as handsome as he had always been. Before she could continue thinking any further, she suddenly heard someone entering her home. Dong-hyuk had unexpectedly returned. He noticed that Soren was lying on the couch with her eyes closed as though she had already fallen asleep. Softly calling out her name, he tried to see whether she would respond. In reality, Soren was fully awake, but because she had become so nervous by his unexpected arrival, she deliberately pretended to remain asleep, afraid that she would not know what to say if she opened her eyes. Dong-yuk quietly explained that he had been completely unable to fall asleep after returning home. He reminded her that she had told him he could come over whenever he wanted because he already knew the passcode to her house. He added that he only intended to stay for a little while, rest there briefly, and then head back home afterward. Hearing those words while keeping her eyes closed, Soren was completely surprised. She never imagined that he would actually take her invitation seriously and return to her house the very same night. She silently thought to herself that she had not expected him to really come back. After some time had passed and the awkwardness between them gradually settled, the two of them once again began performing another relaxing stretching routine together. Jisoo walked into Dong-yuk's room early the next morning and admitted that she had gotten so drunk the previous night that she had completely passed out before she even realized what had happened. She then curiously asked him what time he had returned home. Dong-yuk calmly replied that he had come back only after escorting her aunt home safely. Jisoo explained that she had fallen asleep almost immediately after he had left because the alcohol had made her extremely tired. She then mentioned that she already had plans for the day and therefore needed to leave early. Before going, she cheerfully told him that from that day onward, she would make up for everything they had been unable to do the previous day. Hearing those words, Dong-yuk forced himself to remain calm on the outside, but inside his thoughts became troubled once again. He could not stop thinking that if Jisoo were ever to discover what had happened between him and her aunt, Sora, the previous night, she would never be able to forgive him. The guilt continued weighing heavily on his mind, yet he pushed those thoughts aside as he looked at Jisoo standing right in front of him. She energetically suggested that they should quickly begin their private PT session since it was still early in the morning, and Dong-yuk quietly agreed before the two of them immediately started a strength conditioning together. They completed the session without saying much, and once it was over, Jisoo announced that she was going back to her room before quietly leaving. After entering her room, she found herself lost in thought. She reflected that all she had truly wanted was to fill the empty space left behind by her mother and to ease the loneliness that had remained ever since. But no matter how hard she tried, she realized that the emptiness could never truly be replaced. Meanwhile, Suda Dali came over and said that he wanted to speak with Dong-yuk for a moment. Jisoo asked whether something had happened, but instead he urged Dong-yuk to hurry and leave for work. Dong-yuk replied that if they continued talking, he would end up arriving late. Even so, Suda Dali insisted that from then onward, they should begin their private PT session much earlier every morning, so that they could train more effectively before the rest of the day's schedule began. Elsewhere, later that evening, the professor and his wife, Soo-jong, were also carrying out their strength conditioning together. Throughout the session, the professor kept teasing her with a playful smile. He asked whether she had enjoyed meeting his first love, Dong-yuk, and jokingly wondered if the two of them had continued talking after he had passed out from drinking too much the previous night. He repeatedly asked whether she had liked meeting him and continued bringing up the subject in a teasing manner. However, Soo-jong refused to entertain any of his questions. She continuously brushed aside his remarks, dismissed the conversation every time he brought it up, and avoided giving him any answer, making it clear that she had no intention of discussing the matter further. On the other side, Jisoo went to meet Jong-soo at a cafe. After gathering her courage, she unexpectedly asked him if he would become her boyfriend. She honestly admitted that she wanted to know what it actually felt like to date someone because he was the only man she had ever really known. As she spoke, her mind drifted back to the conversation she had shared with Dong-yuk the previous night. She remembered him telling her that instead of spending all of her time with him, she should also try meeting other guys who were around her own age. She also remembered him saying that even after meeting other people, if her feelings still remained the same, then the two of them could continue doing their private PT session together just as they always had. Returning to the present, Jisoo looked at Jong-soo standing in front of him and silently felt guilty. Deep inside, she apologized to him in her heart because she believed that she was using him for reasons that had nothing to do with him. Nevertheless, after they finished talking, she suggested that they should leave together. As they walked side by side, Jeong-soo hesitantly asked whether they had really started dating so suddenly from that very day. Jisoo replied that he could think of it that way if he wanted to. She then asked whether he was uncomfortable with the idea or whether he disagreed with it. Jeong-soo immediately answered that he had no objections at all and that he was completely fine with becoming her boyfriend. After confirming their feelings, the two of them slowly leaned toward each other and shared a kiss. Much later that night, Dong-yuk remained at home waiting for Jisoo because she still had not returned. As more time passed, he became increasingly concerned about how late it had become. Eventually, the front door finally opened, and Jisoo quietly stepped inside. The moment she entered, Dong-yuk asked why she had come home so late. Jisoo calmly answered that she had simply been hanging out with a friend. Dong-yuk then asked whether she had been spending time with Jong-soo and also asked whether she had already eaten dinner. However, instead of directly answering either of his questions, Jisoo merely replied that she was going to wash up and get some rest in her room. Without saying anything else, she quietly walked past him entered her room, and closed the door behind her, leaving Dong-yuk standing there alone with his unanswered questions and conflicted thoughts. The next day, Jisoo went to attend a PT lesson with Jong-soo. At the same time, Dong-yuk was spending his day at his university office, focusing on his work and Dia. After working for a while, his teaching assistant entered the office and asked whether he wanted to go out and have lunch together. Dong-yuk politely declined the invitation, explaining that he was not planning to eat at the moment and telling the teaching assistant not to wait for him and to go ahead without him. The assistant accepted his response and left the office. Not long after the office became quiet again, the door opened once more and someone stepped inside. Dong-yuk immediately looked toward the entrance and was completely surprised to discover that the visitor was Soran. Seeing her standing inside the university office felt completely unexpected, and he admitted that it felt very different seeing her in such a professional environment instead of meeting her elsewhere. Curious about her sudden appearance, he asked what had brought her to the university. Soran calmly explained that she had come there as a visiting professor. Hearing those words instantly made Dong-yuk happy, and he expressed his surprise that she had never mentioned such an important thing to him before. Soran smiled before explaining that they had hardly found any proper opportunity to talk recently, because both of them had been occupied with other matters and constantly busy with different things. She then suggested that, if he had some free time, they could spend a little while together. Dong-yuk readily agreed, naturally assuming that they would simply go out and have lunch together. However, Soran admitted that instead of eating, she felt like doing something much more active. She suggested that they should have a friendly battle together instead. Dong-yuk accepted her suggestion without any objection, and the two of them proceeded to complete an energetic, friendly battle together inside the office. By the time the competitive league match was over, Dong-yuk had become slightly exhausted. He took a deep breath, slowly composed himself, and finally sat down on a chair to recover from the PT lesson. Just then, the teaching assistant returned to the office. Looking at Dong-yuk, the assistant casually asked whether he had already eaten lunch. Dong-yuk simply replied that he had not eaten because he had not been feeling particularly hungry. As the teaching assistant remained inside the office for another moment, the assistant suddenly noticed something unusual and remarked that there seemed to be a rather strange smell lingering throughout the room. Meanwhile, Soo-jeong was spending time with her husband. She mentioned that she had developed a headache, making him immediately become concerned about her condition. He gently asked whether something was wrong or whether she was feeling unwell. Soo-jeong reassured him that it was nothing serious before explaining that she already had plans for dinner later that evening. She told him that she would be going out to meet some of her old school friends and that she would return after spending some time with them. After hearing her explanation, her husband quietly accepted her decision. Once she had finished speaking, he remained seated by himself, silently staring ahead while becoming completely lost in his own thoughts, unable to stop thinking about everything that had been on his mind. Elsewhere, Mi-soon went to meet Jeong-soo after his baseball practice. As soon as she arrived, she asked whether he had already finished practicing. Jeong-soo, who had just completed his training, looked around before asking where Jisoo was. Mi-soon explained that she had come by herself and that Jisoo was not with her. After a brief pause, she shyly admitted that, if he did not mind, she wanted the two of them to spend some time together alone. She explained that she simply wanted them to have some fun together without anyone else accompanying them. Hearing those unexpected words caught Jeong-soo completely off guard, and he could not hide the surprised expression that appeared across his face. At the same time, Soo-jeong was driving by herself while quietly enjoying the scenery outside her car. As she continued along the road, her eyes were drawn toward the beautiful evening sky. She found herself admiring how breathtaking the sunset looked and silently thought that the view was absolutely amazing. While appreciating the scenery, another thought crossed her mind as she wondered whether Dong-yuk was still at the university campus or if he had already finished his work for the day. Elsewhere, Mi-soon and Jeong-soo eventually arrived at a motel so they could carry out their gaming match. Even after reaching the room, Jeong-soo still hesitated and asked whether she was truly certain that she wanted to go through with it. Mi-soon reminded him that he had previously been the one who wanted to improve himself by doing private PT session because he did not want to embarrass himself in front of Jisoo. Jeong-soo responded by pointing out that she had actually been the one who suggested that they come to the motel in the first place. Mi-soon admitted that ever since they had arrived there, she had been feeling extremely awkward and nervous about the entire situation. After spending several moments hesitating without making any progress, Jeong-soo finally remarked that they had already wasted enough time standing around. He suggested that instead of continuing to hesitate any longer, they should simply begin their strength conditioning together. On the other side, Soo-jeong made her way to Dong-yuk's office to see him after finishing her own schedule. As she stepped inside and found him sitting there by himself, she smiled faintly and remarked that she had known she would find him there. Dong-yuk looked up from the book he had been quietly reading and explained that he had simply been spending some time reading because he had already finished his work. He added that he had actually been about to leave and head back home. Soo-jeong let out a tired sigh and admitted that she was completely exhausted. She explained that all of the unnecessary gatherings and formal meetings she had been attending recently had drained both her energy and her patience. Looking around the office, she noticed that every light in the surrounding rooms had already been turned off. Since Dong-yuk was still sitting there alone, she assumed that everyone else had already left for the day. Dong-yuk agreed that it had become very late and said there was no reason for either of them to remain at the office any longer. He suggested that they leave together and offered to walk her home on the way. Before they could leave, Soo-jong hesitated for a moment before finally opening up about the feelings she had been keeping hidden. She admitted that ever since the day they had first met, she had never once been able to stop thinking about him. No matter how much time passed, he continued to occupy her thoughts, and she constantly felt as though he was the only person who had ever been meant for her. After confessing those feelings, she quietly said that the only thing she wanted to do at that moment was to initiate a private PT session. Dong-yuk remained silent for a brief moment before eventually agreeing to her request. Without saying anything further, the two of them began practicing together, concentrating entirely on their gymming techniques throughout the training. Meanwhile, Jisoo remained at home waiting for Dong-yuk to return. As time continued to pass, she found herself becoming increasingly restless. She thought to herself that he had been coming home very late almost every day recently, and the longer she waited, the more anxious she became. She recalled experiencing the same uneasy feeling before, yet no matter how hard she tried, she simply could not control the anxiety growing inside her heart. The silence of the empty house only made her feel even more nervous and lonely. Hoping to distract herself from her thoughts, she continued training by herself, but even while practicing, her mind remained completely focused on Dong-yuk. Throughout the entire time, she could only hope that he would return home as quickly as possible. After quite some time had passed, Dong-yuk finally arrived home. As he quietly entered the house, he glanced at the clock and realized that it was already well past midnight. Believing that Jisoo had surely gone to sleep by then, he carefully walked further inside without making much noise. However, Jisoo had never actually stopped thinking about him for even a moment while she waited. She had eventually gone into his room and remained there because she could not bring herself to stop worrying. When Dong-yuk entered his room, he softly wondered whether she had already fallen asleep. The moment she heard his voice, Jisoo instinctively pretended to be asleep instead of responding. Dong-yuk then noticed that she had fallen asleep in his room while waiting for him to return. Jisoo, on the other hand, silently thought that she should get up immediately and tell him that she was actually awake. However, she quickly realized that she had already continued pretending for so long that suddenly opening her eyes would only make the situation awkward, so she remained completely still. Looking at her peaceful sleeping face, Dong-yuk quietly remarked that she must have spent a long time waiting for him before eventually falling asleep. As he continued observing her, he gently smiled and commented that she looked exactly like her mother whenever she was asleep. Although he believed she could not hear him, he continued speaking softly while looking at her. After a while, he quietly said that she should probably return to her own room and sleep there comfortably instead. Listening to every word without moving, Jisoo silently reflected on the day she had brought Jong-soo home. She remembered that Dong-yuk had never become angry with her over that incident, and realizing that made her feel incredibly relieved. After some time had passed, she finally woke up, and the two of them eventually decided to perform a strength conditioning together. Outside the house, Soren arrived sometime later and repeatedly pressed the doorbell. She continued ringing it several times, but no one immediately came to answer the door. While waiting outside, she suddenly remembered that Jisoo had once told her the passcode to enter the house. However, no matter how hard she tried to remember it, the numbers simply would not come back to her. Just then, the front door suddenly opened, and Jisoo stood there looking at her with a surprised expression before asking why she had come over at such a late hour. Soren immediately asked whether Dong-yuk was at home. Jisoo replied that it was already very late and explained that Dong-yuk had already gone to sleep. Hearing that, Soren simply nodded and said that she would come back to see him the following day instead. After saying that, she quietly left. Once the door was closed again, Jisoo walked back inside while wondering if Soren had come over because she had been drinking. She also questioned whether Soren had been looking for Dong-yuk so late at night because something might have happened between the two of them. When she mentioned her thoughts, Dong-yuk calmly replied that he was not aware of anything at all. He casually suggested that perhaps Soren had simply wanted to stop by and see him the next day, or that she might have had some other reason for visiting. After that, he suggested that they should stop thinking about it, go to bed, and get some rest. Meanwhile, Soren returned to her own house. Once she was back inside, she quietly reflected on the fact that there was no one available to train with her that day. Since she had no partner to practice alongside, she decided that she would simply spend her time by commencing her self-care routine alone until she had someone to practice with again. The following day, during the evening, Jeong-soo came to meet Jisoo. As soon as they met, he cheerfully mentioned that it was actually a good thing he had not been required to attend practice that day. He then asked whether she would have been busy with other plans if he had been forced to go to his sports practice instead. Jisoo looked at him curiously and asked why he had suddenly come to see her. Jiangsu admitted that there was something important he wanted to tell her. Looking at her sincerely, he confessed that being with her always made him genuinely happy. Hearing those heartfelt words only made Jisoo feel even guiltier than before. She silently thought that perhaps this was finally the moment when she needed to tell him that she wanted to end their relationship. Even so, she found herself unable to say the words immediately because she felt deeply sorry for hurting him. After struggling with herself for a while, she finally looked him in the eyes, apologized sincerely, and gently admitted that she believed they should stop dating. However, before Jiangsu could fully process everything she had just said, he suddenly confessed that he wanted to kiss her. Moments later, the two of them shared a kiss. Once it ended, Jisoo apologized once again, and she explained that she had truly tried to forget those feelings and move on, but no matter how hard she tried, her heart simply refused to let go. She also confessed that because of those lingering feelings, she no longer believed their relationship could work as a couple. Jiangsu quietly wondered who that man could possibly be and admitted that just thinking about him made him feel jealous. Even so, he asked whether they could at least continue being friends despite everything that had happened. Jisoo immediately agreed and assured him that they could remain friends. After saying goodbye, Jiangsu left to attend his baseball practice session. Although he tried to focus on his training, he gradually became more frustrated and angry as thoughts of Jisoo continued filling his mind. During practice, he suddenly received a message from Misoon asking him to meet her at a certain place. He immediately went to meet her and asked whether something had happened. Misoon replied that nothing was wrong and simply explained that she wanted to 1v1 him in a competitive league match. Soren was sitting quietly inside the taxi. She could not help thinking that despite spending so much time in both the United States and Korea, she still had not been able to find the kind of man she truly wanted. The more she thought about it, the more frustrated she became, feeling as though fate had been playing a cruel joke on her all this time. After remaining silent for a while, she suddenly looked toward the taxi driver with a curious expression and asked whether he honestly thought she was an attractive woman. The driver smiled politely before telling her that he had been working as a taxi driver for many years and had met countless passengers throughout his career, but he had genuinely never come across anyone as attractive as her. Hearing such a compliment, Soren gave a faint smile and told him that he certainly had a wonderful eye for beauty. However, despite hearing those flattering words, she admitted that they did not really comfort her because the only person she truly liked did not seem to have any romantic interest in her at all. The driver quietly listened while continuing to drive, and before long, the taxi finally reached her destination. Soren thanked the driver, stepped out of the taxi, and slowly made her way toward the building. On the other side, Dongyuk and Jisoo were busy carrying out some strength conditioning together. Both of them were completely focused on the friendly battle as they encouraged one another throughout the PT lesson. Meanwhile, Soren slowly climbed the stairs while her thoughts once again drifted toward Dongyuk. As she continued walking, she wondered whether the feelings growing inside her heart were completely wrong. She questioned herself, thinking that perhaps loving her late sister's husband was nothing less than betraying her deceased sister's memory. Even though she knew those thoughts were inappropriate, she could not stop herself from thinking about him. Eventually, she arrived outside Dongyuk's house and stood silently in front of the door for a brief moment before reaching out and pressing the doorbell. She waited, hopefully, expecting Dongyuk to answer the door, but after hearing no response, she rang the bell once again. Since everything remained unusually quiet, she slowly entered the house while calling out, wondering aloud whether everyone had already gone to sleep because the entire house was so silent. She carefully walked through the house before making her way into Dongyuk's room, only to discover that he was not there. Looking around in confusion, she quietly thought to herself that she had clearly seen his shoes near the entrance, so there was no way he had actually left the house. At that very moment, Dongyuk and Jisoo had already hidden themselves inside Jisoo's room. As soon as they realized that Soren had unexpectedly arrived, Jisoo became extremely surprised and visibly nervous because she had never imagined Soren would suddenly come over without informing them beforehand. Dongyuk was equally shocked because he had not expected such an awkward situation to unfold. Neither of them knew how to react while quietly remaining inside the room. A few moments later, Soren slowly approached Jisoo's bedroom door before placing her hand on the handle and opening it. The instant the door swung open, she froze in surprise after seeing Dongyuk sitting beside Jisoo while gently massaging her sore shoulders. Unable to hide her confusion, she immediately looked at Dongyuk and asked why he was inside Jisoo's room. Remaining calm despite the unexpected interruption, Dongyuk explained that Jisoo had been working on her school assignment for quite some time and had complained that her shoulders were hurting badly, so he had simply been giving her a shoulder massage to help ease the pain. After listening to his explanation, Soren smiled softly and commented that he was still just as caring and considerate as he had always been. She recalled how he had treated her sister with the very same kindness and warmth in the past, saying that nothing about his gentle personality had changed over the years. After that, she casually mentioned that she was feeling very hungry and suggested that the three of them should prepare and eat some instant noodles together. She then asked both Dong-hyuk and Jisoo to come out of the room so they could all eat together. A little while later, the three of them were seated around the dining table with steaming bowls of instant noodles placed in front of them. As they quietly ate together, Jisoo looked towards Soren and politely asked what had brought her there so unexpectedly. Soren calmly replied that she wanted to spend the night at their house. Hearing that, Dong-hyuk looked at her in surprise and questioned why she wanted to stay there when she already had her own place. Jisoo also gently reminded her that she had her own home and wondered why she suddenly wanted to sleep there instead. Soren let out a small sigh before honestly explaining that sleeping alone every single night made her feel incredibly lonely. She admitted that the silence of her own home had become difficult to bear, so she thought it would be perfectly alright if she stayed there for just one night. Dong-hyuk still seemed hesitant and told her that she might end up feeling uncomfortable because the house was not really prepared for an overnight guest. However, Soren assured him that she did not mind at all. She cheerfully said that she could simply sleep in Jisoo's room because she wanted to hold Jisoo tightly while sleeping, believing that Jisoo must also feel lonely having no one beside her at night. Then, she slowly turned her eyes toward Dong-hyuk and, with a playful smile on her face, jokingly remarked that if he happened to be feeling lonely as well, she could hug him too. Immediately after saying those words, she burst into laughter and quickly clarified that she was only teasing him. The atmosphere gradually became more relaxed as they continued eating together, and once everyone had finished their noodles, Dong-hyuk looked at both of them and quietly remarked that it had already become quite late, so they should all head to bed and get some rest for the night. After returning home, Soren went to take a shower while Dong-hyuk decided to wash the dishes after their late-night meal. At the same time, Jisoo stayed busy cleaning the house. The three of them quietly finished their respective chores, and once Dong-hyuk had completed washing and putting away all the dishes, he slowly made his way back to his room. He lay down on his bed and tried to fall asleep, but despite closing his eyes, sleep refused to come. As he stared at the ceiling, his thoughts drifted toward Jisoo, and he found himself wondering whether she had already fallen asleep in her room or if she was still awake. Unable to stop thinking about her, he reached for his phone and decided to send her a message. Meanwhile, inside Jisoo's room, both she and Soren were lying on the bed, trying to sleep. Suddenly, Jisoo's phone vibrated with a new message. She quietly checked it and saw that it was from Dong-hyuk. In his message, he asked whether she was already asleep. He then added that if she was still awake, she could quietly come to his room. After reading the message, Jisoo carefully sat up on the bed and quietly prepared to leave the room without making any noise. However, just as she was about to step outside, Soren unexpectedly woke up and looked at her with a puzzled expression. She immediately asked where Jisoo was going, pointing out that she had just been sleeping a moment ago. Caught off guard, Jisoo quickly made up an excuse and replied that she was simply feeling thirsty and wanted to go to the kitchen to get a glass of water. Upon hearing that, Soren smiled and said that she was feeling thirsty as well, so she decided to accompany Jisoo to the kitchen instead of letting her go alone. At the same time, Dong-hyuk remained inside his room, waiting for Jisoo to reply to his message or quietly come over. As the minutes continued to pass without any response, he began wondering why she had not replied at all. Unable to wait any longer, he eventually got out of bed and quietly stepped outside his room. When he looked toward the kitchen, he immediately saw Jisoo and Soren standing together, both of them drinking water. Realizing that the opportunity had completely disappeared because Soren was still awake and staying in the house, he quietly closed his bedroom door again and returned to his room. As he lay back on his bed, he thought to himself that there was no chance for the two of them to have any privacy while Soren was there. He even began considering that perhaps he should change the front door password or find some other way to make sure their private moments could not be interrupted so easily in the future. Later that night, after he had finally fallen asleep, Soren quietly entered his room without waking him. She slowly walked over to the bed before lying down beside him. Looking at his sleeping face, she softly remarked that he had become much more attractive than before. She continued gazing at him and quietly commented that he now looked far more reliable, mature, and handsome than he used to. Although Dong-hyuk was only partially awake, he could hear her words and felt completely confused, unable to understand why she was suddenly saying such things to him. The following morning, Dong-hyuk slowly opened his eyes and immediately felt a throbbing headache. Still feeling exhausted, he got out of bed and walked out of his room. As soon as he stepped into the living area, he saw Jisoo mopping the floor and cleaning the house. Noticing that he was finally awake, Jisoo looked at him with a smile and asked whether he had just gotten up. Dong-hyuk replied that he had indeed just woken up before suggesting that the two of them should perform their usual stretching session together that morning. Jisoo happily agreed with his suggestion, and the two of them prepared to begin their wholesome PT lesson together.